So you're in Toronto. You have visited a few cities in recent weeks where there are Twitter offices. You're going to be continuing to do this. What's the goal of what you're doing, and what have you learned so far from visiting these different offices?
Well, we've never actually visited all of our offices, so I'll be visiting every single Twitter office, and Square has a few within these locations as well. And the goal is to see our people directly, to see where they work, to understand what they're struggling with, and to realize again and again and again that like our clock runs around San Francisco, and I just don't fundamentally believe that is our future. I believe that work is changing. The location where you are won't matter as much, and I want to make sure that we continue to be relevant for people who want to join and come work to serve our purpose of serving the public conversation. And in the future, that'll mean that they might feel most creative in a city we've never heard of, or at home in a small town. And we should be building our process and our work around that. We should focus on the folks that want to raise their hand and say, I want to join the company, but I want to stay where I am. And I think this world of moving people to San Francisco, requiring folks to live in San Francisco and work in San Francisco, is coming to a close.
And you're leading by example to a certain extent, because you're starting to spend some time working from home. So it sounds like you're encouraging others in the workforce to do something similar. Does this play into all those things we talk about, the price of housing coming into the city, the tensions that are created for people who are trying to make a living, all those kinds of things?
I think it has an effect. I mean, Twitter was one of the first technology companies of our cohort, of our era, to say no to Silicon Valley and to say yes to San Francisco. And we did so because that's where we wanted to live. That's where we appreciated city living rather than living down in the suburbs. And it's, the city has changed because of it. And it's not just us bringing folks into the city. It's also some pretty terrible policy by city government to not allow densification of the city as well, creating a element of scarcity, which rises all the prices of all the housing within the area. So there's multiple dimensions to any of these things, but ultimately, we have people who want to work at Twitter but don't want to live in San Francisco. Not because there's anything wrong with San Francisco, but they're just more comfortable. They feel more creative where they're from or where they currently are.
These are the kinds of things I would imagine that evolve as a business grows up, and certainly in the case of Twitter, it's a business that has grown up, and you referenced you're visiting cities that in some cases might have both Square and they might have Twitter as well. You talk a lot about prioritization. When you're the CEO of two companies, you really have to focus in on what matters most. What would you say is your number one priority at Twitter right now? It sounds like this is one issue you're thinking about, but what would you say is top of the list?
Conversational health, incentivizing more healthy contribution to the public conversation. We've seen abuse, we've seen harassment, we've seen people leave our platform because of it, we've seen voices being silenced because of what's happening on the service, and that is number one. Like, we can't build a platform of speech, a platform of conversation, and a service that will remain relevant to people if people don't feel safe to speak up in the first place. So for all those who believe in free expression and all those who believe in free speech, it's critical that we're not utilizing technologies like Twitter to shut down voices and to silence others. And a lot of our policies and enforcement, and now more and more so technology, is aimed at addressing this problem. It's never going to be fully solved because it's one of those things where you just have to constantly iterate, and perfection is not a goal. But we need to give people much better controls over their experience, and we need to do more of the work for them. We need to take away the burden of reporting harassment or abuse. We need to utilize technology better to automatically identify where it's happening or where there's a high probability of it happening, so that people don't necessarily have to see it when they didn't ask to get into the fray as what's brought to them.
How much of it is Twitter focusing on that? How much of it is inviting more conversation from outside parties? And I ask that because for the last few days there have been a lot of headlines around Mark Zuckerberg's piece in the Washington Post about more regulation of the internet. Did you have a chance to see those comments? Would you say they align with your general views? Because you have talked about this issue before.
I think so. Generally, I think regulation is a good thing. It's a net positive, and I think our role as a company should be that of an educator, helping regulators and legislators understand what's happening with technology, the secular trends that we're seeing, that we're aware of, how our system works. And the job of a regulator is to ensure protection of the individual and a level playing field. So as long as we're working together on that, that has good outcomes. I haven't looked at all the specific feedback to Mark's post, but I generally think that there are things like GDPR that have been net positive, not just for our platform, but also for the industry in general, and specifically adds a lot more clarity around privacy. It adds a lot more clarity around how data is being used. And typically a service like ours, our terms of service are a little bit hard to read and a little bit hard to follow, and not necessarily the most customer-focused thing. So GDPR put a stake in the ground to at least bring out some elements that you had a lot more control over, and I think that's a net positive. So if there's more room for that, then yes, absolutely. But we also, there's not going to be any one party that's responsible for fixing this. I think putting too much of that weight on any one entity, whether it be a corporation, individual, a government, is just not going to work. We have to think about it a little bit differently. We have to think about it as a desire. We have a desire. Our purpose is to serve the public conversation. Our desire is to incentivize and increase healthy conversation in that. And for that, we can look much deeper. We can look at what we're incentivizing. We can look at the very foundational nature of the service and making sure that we're not incentivizing behaviors that would take away from health. And today there's areas where I think we are. So those are the questions that we're asking, and it will lead to some fundamental shifts in how the service works and how people experience it.
So the conversation has obviously evolved on Twitter over the last decade, and the business has evolved. I mean, we went from a business that didn't have revenue to $3 billion in revenue last year. And now we're at a point where the industry itself is looking at what are the driving forces going forward. I say that because, for example, Twitter is moving away from sharing metrics like monthly active users, and you're not alone in the industry in pivoting there. How do you measure success of the business today? What are you looking at in particular?
We want to provide utility to people that's valuable every single day. Our purpose of serving the public conversation, of answering the question, what's happening? That's a question that you ask every single day and multiple times a day. And we want to be measured internally by the value we bring to someone every single day. And we need to make sure that we're not just utilizing that understanding and that goal internally, but that also externally people hold us accountable to that as well. So the move away from MAU is to better align what we want to do and what we want to be and the value that we want to provide the world. So I don't think it's a general movement away from MAU, because there are services that are valuable on a monthly basis rather than a daily basis. And there's some services that are valuable on a weekly basis rather than a daily basis or a monthly basis. So I think any entrepreneur, any leader of a service like ours needs to look deeply at what they're goaling around and how they thinking about driving their service and their business, and then make sure there's no dissonance between what we say internally and what we say externally.
You mentioned that word goal. One thing I've heard from people who work with you is that you do push them when it's thinking about a new product or something they might be pitching you on, to go that 5 or 10 years down the road visually and explain what that might look like, and then work backwards from there, which is a little different than A lot of businesses, it's here where we are today, and here's where we'll be in 5 or 10 years. Why do you like to go through that exercise?
I like the power of storytelling. It's when we can tell a story about an experience that someone might have on our service, it builds a ton of empathy. It enables people to complete the story in a different way, potentially, so that leads to more creativity and more invention. And it allows us to paint a picture of what ifs, which we can change and convert into, is that possible? And we can then decide to make it possible. So I think the more visual we can speak about where we're going and how people will experience us, it just puts everything in perspective, and it puts in perspective of the customer, of the person that we're actually serving, and what they're struggling with, and where we can solve some of their problems. All businesses, all services, we have one job: solve problems. Understand someone's struggle and solve the problem, and ideally in a unique, inventive, differentiated way that sets us apart from others. And the more visual we can make these problems, the easier it is to understand how we might solve them in a unique way that feels valuable.
Can I assume, based on some of what you're saying, that you already have a vision on where you think Twitter will be 10 years from today?
I think visions are tough, because it suggests that you have perfect clarity around an endpoint. And I would rather focus on what we believe and getting a lot of conviction around what we believe, and then test some hypotheses towards it and work on a very long time frame, because it's very rarely the case that you can do anything instrumental or important in a span of certainly a quarter or a year. Oftentimes these things take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to click. And if we get too short term in our thinking, we miss an opportunity to be truly creative and go a level deeper into what we're trying to build. So I try to focus myself on what I believe is possible or feels impossible today, and then what's blocking us from making it possible. And then the guide and the vision really stems from that. But if we get too concrete around a particular vision, upon a particular direction, a new technology might come up which completely makes what we thought was right irrelevant.
You talk a lot about building a business or businesses that will outlive you.
Mm-hmm.
You've used the example of your experience on Disney's board as seeing a company that still goes back to think about what Walt himself would have done. So how are you doing that? How are you building businesses that you think are poised to outlive you?
Yeah, I mean, just some simple principles. I believe if, number one, my job is not to make decisions. My job is to ensure that decisions are being made, and they're being made in the context of who we're serving, in the context of secular trends, in the context of new technologies that might impact us, in the context of competition. If I have to make a decision, I believe that there is something wrong organizationally, and it's on me to fix it. And what that does is decentralizes decision making so that we don't have dependency upon one person, including myself. And if we can do more of that, then we have a shot at not becoming dependent upon any one person, including me or our board or our leadership, and just naturally doing the right thing. So then, a big part of my job is also to make sure that we're raising the bar on what we thought was possible. I think too often, as we grow as individuals and as we grow with organizations, we start getting more precious about what we have, and we stop taking as much risk because we fear losing it. So I serve a function of reminding ourselves that we should infuse more risk into our thinking and into our action, that what we thought was impossible is actually quite possible. We just need to decide to do it. So just raising the bar on our execution and what we thought possible. And ideally, we're building a dynamic where we're not competing with a Facebook or an Instagram or a Snapchat. We're competing with ourselves. We're competing with ourselves, from 6 months ago or from a year ago, and we're seeing more urgency. We're seeing better solutions to common problems. We're seeing less people being able to do more within the service and within the company. So these are the things that I look at, and those are the things that give me confidence that we'll continue to be an organization that will be relevant to the world and independent of me being there or who I am or the fact that I was a founder of the company. That should not be relevant at all. And I want to set up a dynamic where the company has multiple founding moments and they come from people who are not me.
And that does seem to weave in a little bit with something else that you talk about, which is going out of your comfort zone. Because you've said in your career, when you've done that, oftentimes it's paid big dividends.
Yeah,
is there one of those kinds of examples right now where somewhere in your career, in your business life, where you're going out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, every year there's something new. I mean, just everything that we're doing around health, all the conversations we're having, everything Square is doing with cryptocurrencies are just interesting, new, edgy frontiers, and it just tests a lot of our thinking. The thing that I want us to be, both companies, are just a very, very open company. Open with our roadmaps, open with how we think about our challenges, open with our evolution. And that's something that more broadly at both companies is not comfortable to the companies. It's something new and something that we have some hesitancy around, all coming from a good place, but I believe we need to shift, and the reason why is because we have to earn more trust, and we need to be a lot more transparent in how we act and how we make decisions and how we're thinking about solving these problems. So the more open we can be, the more accountable we can be, the more transparent, reliable, dependable, the more we have potential to earn trust. And trust is in short supply these days. So if we truly want to endure beyond my lifetime and beyond the lifetime of all the new folks coming into both companies, we have to put trust as a premium. Otherwise, again, we just become irrelevant and something that people don't want to use.
Do you think that idea of going outside of your comfort zone can relate specifically back to Twitter? Because I remember recently you talked about Elon Musk being one of your favorite examples of how somebody uses Twitter. Now, in the role that he has, there are a lot of traditional people in the world of business who would say, aha, look at that, I couldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that. But then you have this gap of business leaders who maybe aren't using Twitter because of that fear of what they might say or not say or use the platform incorrectly. Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I appreciate Elon's use because he tests the edges. And I think that's always important to do. And if we don't figure out ways to support that, we don't have inventions like Tesla, and we don't have inventions like what SpaceX is doing, because he is ignoring the data and ignoring a lot of what people said was possible, and again, making it possible. So I think it's important to always test the boundaries of all frameworks that we put in front of ourselves. As long as we're doing it with a mindset of, enabling more people to follow and having positive momentum and positive impact, and I think he does that. I think he has a lot of positive intent to make the framework that he has to work in, one being a public company, one being a private company, much better, so that innovators and inventors after him have a path that gets to solutions that he isn't thinking about today. So I think it is important that he's exists and that he shows himself so authentically on the service and is so playful with it, because I think it inspires others to just think very, very differently about their work and what they're doing. And you never know where creativity is going to strike, and he's probably inspired a bunch.
You're very big on getting those moments of clarity, which you can get when you're walking to work. You can get them through things like meditation. I heard a story about you that you're just smartphone all the time, that laptops at work or at home are not really part of your DNA these days?
I only own an iPhone. I own the big one, the Max XS. And the reason I switched about 5 years ago, I got rid of my computer, I got rid of my iPad. And the reason why I like the iPhone as my single device is that I can turn off notifications, and it only allows one app at a time, so I can really focus on what I'm doing, and there's no distraction whatsoever. And I don't do any engineering or programming anymore, so my work allows for this right now. But even if I were, I've actually been testing some programming environments on the iPhone as well, and they're getting pretty good. But I love the freedom it provides. I love the focus it provides. I love that everything I need is always with me at any one point, and I love that I can put it away and just walk away too. And there's nothing following me at all. So when I do need quiet time to think and to and just to work through some of the challenges we're facing, I know just leaving it in one particular area, I'm going to be unbothered.